Welcome back to Retired Techie. I'm glad you could join us again, or join me again, since I'm the only one doing this. But anyway, I'm going to talk about simplifying and decluttering my workspace by taking several of my servers and putting them on a Type 1 hypervisor with virtualization, so reducing the number of boxes I've got around and possibly getting rid of a switch. It's between Christmas and New Year's here, and in standard Filipino fashion, we'll be celebrating the New Year with personal fireworks. We already got those a few weeks ago, so I'll be doing that in a couple of nights. And the other thing 2024 brings that I'm not looking forward to is it's tax season again, and I'll have to do taxes. Other fun things, clean up after holidays, yay, and hopefully get back to somewhat more of an orderly, normal life. But for now, I need to get this video done. So again, we're going to be talking about a declutter project where we'll set up Type 1 hypervisors and virtualize some servers. So stay with us. Since I'm merely discussing things I want to do right now, this video should not be overly long. So I hope you'll stay with me to the end. And I haven't been saying this. I guess I should be. Please like, subscribe, comment. I love getting comments. Don't get that many, but I love getting them. I was talking about my current setup with the 4 servers and setting that up as a Type 1 hypervisor and virtualizing them all. Most of the time, I've noticed the servers are not running full bore. In fact, most of the time, they're running about around 5 to 10%. That does change with holidays, and we'll see a change this coming weekend with the 1st of January, the fireworks, and we'll have a lot of visitors again. And they'll jump up to heavy usage at that point. I say it's about once or twice a month. We have people up, and then at that point the servers are working kind of hard. Unlike my family, which isn't all that big, my wife has a large family, so lots of relatives. So I've been looking at Type 1 hypervisors. They all run through, well, I'm going to be using Linux, so they're all going to run through something called KVM, but the big boy on the block seems to be Proxmox, although apparently I can use Cockpit with a Cockpit attached machines and some other KVM related software to set up hypervisors that way as a Type 1. I've actually been playing with Proxmox for the last couple of days, and I'm going to have to say I'm not really a fanboy for Proxmox. I know a lot of people out there are, but the service, the setup, the whole thing just left something to be desired. I mean, it's a nice concept, and I think they've gone a long way towards fulfilling it, but when I was trying to do the things I wanted to do, either it wasn't an option. Like, for example, I wanted to split up one of my drives. It happened to be the drive I was installing the system on, and Proxmox wants to use the whole drive. To split up the drive, you basically have to install Debian 12 and then update to Proxmox. And looking at the list of instructions for that, I said, no, I don't think so. I mean, it wasn't hard, there was just a lot of things to do. And I already use Cockpit on some of my other servers to monitor them, so I'm somewhat familiar with how that works. Other issues I've had with the Proxmox, it seems like half the time I'm trying to do something, I suddenly have to go to the command line to do it because there's no options available. Like, for example, I wanted to add a hard drive, but I apparently can't do that through the GUI. I have to use a shell and do fun things with my fstab file. Looking at a lot of these things, it's like, well, Proxmox, it seems a little overkill and it really does not fit my needs, not the way I need it to. So my next shot is, like I said, I'm going to try Cockpit and set that up as a hypervisor with KVM, libvirt, and virt manager. And we'll see how that works out. In fact, I think I'm going to do a video on that. I should have recorded my work with Proxmox. You could have seen me crash it 3, 4 times, I think it was, but I didn't think about it at the time. Right now that I am thinking about it, I will do a video on the cockpit Type 1 hypervisor I'm going to build. Of course, I would be remiss in not pointing out that both cockpit and Proxmox are sponsored by corporations. This is sort of a problem with both products. The way it works, and I've worked in the corporate environment as well as a lot of other places, and I'm going to tell you now, corporations, no matter what they say, are not humanitarian organizations, and you're just one meeting away from everything changing. And most of the decisions they make are going to be done by committee, and I am very familiar with the fact that committees never make good decisions, at least not in my experience. You can feel free to disagree with me if you want. And the reason this is, at least again, my experience, my opinion, is that when you're a corporate shill working on a project, you're only looking at the end of the fiscal year. You're not looking at the long-term effects. In fact, if things work out correctly, you'll save some money, take some credit, and then move along to another job before there's any fallout. I digress, and I really need to get off my soapbox here because this is not about, well, it's not about, but just heads up on the corporations. If you look at some of the things that happened with Conical lately and some of the stuff that's going on with Red Hat, it can tell you how things can change all of a sudden. I talked about Proxmox and the problems I had with it, but like I want to be fair about it. And like the interface does look nice, and if it had more of the stuff I wanted to do as part of the interface, I think I might be a little more inclined to use it. And if there was a way to shut off the nag notice without going in and editing scripts, that would help too. But one of the things I do want to talk about is my servers are basically home computers. I mean, if you've got a critically functional server, you should probably be using a subscription to Proxmox, and you should probably be using server hardware, not what I'm doing here. And in most cases, I see a lot of people saying you need to do this, you need to do that, and what you only really need to do is have a good backup for when things go south. Otherwise, no, you don't need to do a lot of stuff. You don't need to take up a whole drive for the Proxmox installation just because you need to save it off or something. Like I say, a lot of things I see people talking about could be solved just by having a good backup policy. So next thing I'm going to do, and probably for the next video, is I've already installed Debian 12. I deleted Proxmox because it crashed again and wouldn't boot up. So when you get to that point, nothing else to do. And I've installed Debian 12 on the server. So next video, I'll probably work on getting that set up with the cockpit. So you might want to join me for that. Since we've been talking a lot about virtualization, I thought we should take a look at what virtualization actually means in a little bit of detail. So let's go all the way to the beginning, the hardware. Again, this is going to be an x86 platform in this case. And that's going to include your CPU, your RAM, your storage drive, your, well, everything, all the hardware. Basically, that's pretty much what it is. Now, on top of the hardware, we see the kernel. In Linux, the kernel is it. It's the center heart of the system. It controls a lot of the system operations. And this sits on top of the hardware. It interprets user input for the hardware and vice versa. But within the kernel, especially the Linux kernel, there is something called a KVM module. So this KVM module is what makes Linux able to do virtual machines. Also sitting on top of the kernel is our operating system. Our shells run out of the OS. That includes graphic shells like GNOME shell or terminals or what have you. It's all our user space tools. Now, what makes this a Type 1 hypervisor is that our hypervisor does not sit on top of the OS. It sits on top of the kernel next to the OS. In this case, this is QEMU, which is basically what runs our virtual machines. It does just basically that. It does a hardware interpretation, and it runs the virtual machines, and it resides right on top of the kernel. Interacting with the QEMU is something called the libvirt. Whereas QEMU actually runs our virtual machines, libvirt is our manager. It decides how many CPUs, how much RAM, how much disk space, et cetera, et cetera. It's not really running on top, more to the side, but we're just showing it on top for this. And then the last piece of the puzzle is the GUI or user interface, and that's Virt Manager. And this is a standard Linux simple virtual setup. So Virt Manager is our user space tools, works through the OS, and again with libvirt and QEMU, and it's what allows us to give commands and see results and things like that. So the only thing missing from this diagram is remote interface. And generally, I'm talking about remote interface. I'm talking about a web interface. This is one of Proxmox's big selling points, is it has a web interface. QEMU, libvirt, etc., can work through Cockpit, so it has a web interface there. But again, this is assuming you're not working directly on a headless machine. You need this interface of some sort, whether it's SSH or a web interface. And that's basically where we sit. All right, let's talk a little bit about my current office setup. So I've got Converge ITC here in the Philippines. They gave me an EG8145 version 5 router. It's the ISP version. It's a optical modem, a router, a switch, and a wireless access point all in one. So I'm going to be referring to it basically as the all-in-one. Now the router, the all-in-one, has 4 LAN ports on the back. I've got one connected to the rest of my network. I've got one connected to my personal computer, a laptop in this case, and then I've got one other Ethernet cable connected to the Netgear 8-port switch, because I got 4 servers sitting up here on my desk that I'm using. So I got a DNS server, a file server, a media server, and a game server, which is far more than I can actually plug straight into the all-in-one from Converge. So I need to use the 8-port switch. Now, in reality, I could probably merge the media server and file server. Yeah, I could possibly do that, but I would still have too many connections. So what I want to do is the following. So my short-term goal is my short-term goal here is to set up 2 Type 1 hypervisor servers that I could plug into the 2 open ports and do away with the switch. On the hypervisor servers, I'll run my DNS server, my file server, my media server, my game server. I will need to see how the load goes on these and make adjustments, which virtual machine runs on which server, but the end goal is to reduce the amount of servers sitting up there and get rid of the switch. Although I may have to bring the switch back because I've got a Arlo security base station that I might want to plug in out here, but that's a whole other video or a whole other article, so we don't want to discuss that here. This is what I'm hoping to get to sometime in the next month or so. Well, that's it for this video. I promised you'd be short, and it was short, but the next one, when I work on the cockpit, KVM, Virt Manager, all that sort of stuff, that should be a longer video because we'll actually be doing something interesting. So hope you come around for that one. And like I say, this is just me gabbing here a lot, and I'm taking up enough of your time. So let's go ahead and move on. Okay.